All right, Jay, it's that time of year. It's the Holiday Hodge-Podge.
Scott, I'll tell you, the night we're recording this, it is actually supposed to start snowing here in Denver. So if we wanted to postpone this recording until like 1 o'clock a.m., I could do this outside for the really seasonal and festive snow.
Let's make some fake snow.
Okay. Out of surely compostable material, though. Nothing fake plastic.
Of course.
There
of course. No.
Well, congrats, Scott. We've made it to the 2022 Hodgepodge. Always fun to celebrate the end of another successful year.
Yes. And Jay, let's celebrate in our typical fashion with a roundup of lots of different things. So tell us what the listeners, the definers, are going to hear.
Phenomenal. So definers will first hear about the podcast in review this year. Then they'll catch some personal updates from both myself and Scott. We'll talk about our favorite articles of the year. We will run through our sustainable gift ideas for this upcoming holiday season. And we will extend a round of thanks to the folks that have helped support the show over the course of the year.
Jay, do you listen to the 99% Invisible mini stories episodes they do each year? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Actually, no. I know the show, but I don't think I've caught one of their mini episodes.
Oh, it's cool. So at the end of the year, they do this thing where they just have a bunch of mini stories that are interesting, but they felt like they couldn't do a whole episode around it. I feel like the favorite articles is kind of like our mini stories.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
We just don't have names as epic as Roman Mars, right?
No, nor do we have his voice.
Right.
Okay, so the year in review, Jay, I like this. This will be good for those that maybe didn't catch every one of our episodes. What are some favorites for you?
Absolutely. So, Scott, I have to say this episode is my favorite. I think if it weren't my favorite, I might get in trouble. But that would be our sustainable weddings episode that we did with Gina Lett Shrewsbury. So it was, honestly, Scott, really cool. You know, I like to think we can use our research that we do for the show, like generally, just for like our own general knowledge. But it was cool for us to be able to do this research for this episode and then for me to immediately incorporate that into my own wedding planning. It was this really cool kind of feedback process. So much fun. And we've already heard from folks that have used that episode as a resource for their own nuptials, which I think is really funny. My favorite fact from that episode would be that the average wedding produces 400 pounds of garbage and 63 tons of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions of 4 people for an entire year. So I think that for me just helps reinforce how big of a deal weddings are. It's a huge industry.
And we had several people email us, Jay, about this, being like, oh, I just heard your weddings episode. My wedding's coming up later this year, and I've already thought about several things thanks to you. It's
yes,
pretty cool.
Absolutely. So I wonder if they've mentioned us in their vows, Scott.
Yeah, right. If someone has done that, please let us know.
We will straight up interview you and say, why on earth would you do that?
Oh, I like that. We will do that.
All right, so Scott, that is my favorite. If you had to pick yours, what would it be?
Okay, so first of all, personal sustainable investing. That is something I've been trying to be better about, and it was fun to educate myself as part of preparing for the show, as well as inform our listeners. This may have been our longest intro ever, Jay, because there was a lot to cover, a lot of nuance, but it was important to go through all the different types of sustainable investing strategies and tools so that we felt like the listeners could listen and then go about designing their own portfolios, making their own decisions as they like.
And I would interject there, Scott. I mean, it was a long intro, but my goodness, I mean, the depths you can go to with that stuff is just incredible. But I think we both feel good about being able to walk away from that episode thinking, okay, this is actually a decently self-contained introduction for folks to this huge world that is so important.
Right. And Jay, one thing we didn't do yet is really invest our money in a thoughtful way around these strategies, like the podcast money. But I think that's something we're still committed to doing, and we'll tell the listeners when we get around to doing that.
Undoubtedly.
Okay, so one thing that struck me from this episode was the lack of consistency among the environmental, social, and governance ESG ratings that many investors rely on for guidance. So there was this research published by MIT Sloan School of Management that found the correlation among ESG ratings was only 0.61 on average. By comparison, credit ratings from Moody's and S&P are correlated at 0.99. So this means that as the ESG rating services are giving their ratings, they're not giving the same numbers. And that tells you that there's a lot of inconsistency, a lot of differences in the methodologies. Whereas the credit ratings, they're basically the same, no matter if you went to Moody's or S&P. So that's an issue. And then the lack of third-party validation or assurance that these are the right numbers also stood out to me. So 92% of S&P 500 companies published sustainability reports in 2020. Cool. But only 35% of reporting companies utilized external assurance or this validation for their sustainability disclosures, right? So that tells you that the data isn't as strong as maybe it could be because you want that third-party validation so we have more trust in the numbers.
Scott, I love that episode too. Perhaps any others that stood out to you?
Yeah, so the other one I want to mention is air pollution. And this is a topic that's essentially impacting everyone around the world, some more than others, of course. Millions die each year, and there's trillions of dollars in cost each year due to air pollution. We honestly probably should have covered it earlier, Jay. Such an important topic. I like that we had two guests from Mom's Clean Air Force. One leader there more focused on policy, and another more focused on the equity dimension, so that's part of why I liked the episode. And then there was also an important point made in there, that while air quality has over time in the United States, due to the Clean Air Act, improved quite a bit, this may be because the U.S. has had other countries take on the dirty practices to supply us the goods that we use. A 2017 study published in the journal Nature found that more than 50% of China's air pollution at the time was associated with goods and services consumed outside the provinces where they were produced, and that 11% of Chinese air pollution deaths could be traced to goods and services used in the United States and Western Europe. So we're exporting quite a bit of air pollution and even deaths to countries like China that are making these dirtier goods. And then one thing we talked about, Jay, was the Air Quality Index, which is a measurement of the air pollution in various cities and communities. And that is something you can check on the weather app on your phone, various tools online, very easy. And it can change even throughout the day. So it's worth checking, if not every day, or more often than that, every once in a while at least, to make sure that it's safe to go outside and enjoy the outdoors.
Phenomenal PSA, Scott.
Thank you. It's no Smokey the Bear, but...
All right, so I think next on our Hodgepodge, we're going to talk about some of our achievements that we've had over this year, some pretty exciting ones. First, we now have 517 total downloads over the life of this podcast.
517,000, Jay.
Right, and I think that's a real
You said
milestone.
517, I think.
Oh my God. Right, okay, so Scott, turns out I left out 3 zeros. We've got more than 517. All right, so we have over 500,000 downloads, which is a really exciting milestone. That means we saw over 100,000 downloads since this time last year, which has been an increase of 25% year over year. We're still averaging about 10 to 12,000 downloads per month, which is where we were when we last released this episode, but some pretty cool notches for the old podcast belt.
I'll take consistency, Jay, given the break we took and still COVID ramifications and whatnot. So thanks, everyone, for sticking with us.
Right, and 517 downloads is a lot.
Yeah. Yes.
So we also received 222 iTunes reviews over the course of our lifetime, which is up from 202 last year. So we picked up 20 new reviews. Thank you, folks. Please keep them coming. And as a reminder, we read one review at the end of every episode. And chances are good that if you write one, yours will get read. And actually, Scott, let's just go ahead and read one right now while we're at it, instead of saving it to the end to show folks that we really mean business.
I love that idea. Let's do it. Let's tell the listeners about this review from Techie Girl 97, October 13th, 2022. She titled her review article, "Get Serious About Trying to Understand Sustainability and Have a Few Laughs While at It." Scott and Jay are doing an amazing job at explaining sustainability from a wide variety of perspectives, which oftentimes are not so easy to understand, but they condense it and explain it in very digestible and amusing ways. I'm using this podcast to learn more about the field and gauge if I see myself pursuing a career involving sustainability. Thank you guys for taking the time to explain these important topics in such a fun manner. Techie Girl 97.
Techie Girl 97.
You shouldn't have.
Love it.
All right. So beyond the review, Jay, we also want to mention that our most popular episode remains that Careers in Sustainability episode. Trish Kenlon at sustainablecareerpathways.com. Everybody wants to hear from her. I get it, as you should. There's over 17,000 downloads for that episode alone. And this had been a pretty heavily requested topic, Jay, and I know we were excited to cover it. Clearly, definers are hungry for it. They still are. We see downloads every month from that episode. And we hope this episode continues to help our listeners navigate the wild and ever-changing world of sustainability careers.
All right, so recapping the podcast's year in review, it was a big year for us organizationally, Scott, as a podcast. So first and foremost, we want to thank all those that applied for our research and operations director role this fall. We currently are still reviewing candidates, but expect to have a new team member starting with us in January. Stay tuned for an update there. So the team's going to grow. And then, folks, you might have also noticed us doing additional atypical episodes earlier this year. We like to do these episodes because, A, they're very easy to produce, while hopefully still providing you guys as our definers with useful content. So, folks, you'll probably keep seeing more atypical episodes in the future between our normal episodes coming up. Just an FYI, but overall, exciting times for the podcast to grow, stay efficient, and keep churning out good content.
Yeah, and I'd say the atypical episodes, Jay, allow us to be a bit more nimble, try new things, but of course, we've got our tried and true formula that we're not going to deviate from.
Totally. It is, Scott, as like the content creator side, it's fun to just do something different, and just see what kind of shape it takes.
Totally. So personal updates, Jay, this is what the people want. Tell them about your life.
This is like the sustainability like tabloids, right?
Given by ourselves.
yeah. The big headline reading, Jay Siegel changes roles.
No, we want to get out ahead of the paparazzi. Like that's what famous people do. They release their own news.
Smart.
Right? Okay.
That is smart. But I know, Scott, you've mentioned seeing those like flashing photographers constantly, so they're still onto you.
Yes, that is true.
Okay. All right. So on the personal update side, folks, I actually, back in May, had the right opportunity come across my plate for me to move from Storybuilt over to Equity Residential. So Equity Residential, or EQR as we like to call it, is a publicly traded REIT, which is a real estate investment trust that acquires, develops, and manages multifamily properties in dynamic cities across the country. So at EQR, I'm on their development team, and I'm focusing on the Western U.S., specifically on some of our expansion markets of Denver, Dallas, and Austin, as these cities start to get more dense, more populated, hopefully built in a more thoughtful manner. So what really drew me to EQR was its long-term perspective as a real estate owner and operator. So every project that I'm able to get my hands on is viewed as an investment for the long haul, which means we pay special attention to sustainability and resilience. That can cover everything from achieving LEED status to adding extra waterproofing and on-site power generation to our projects. So it's cool to be able to marry those two passions of mine together.
There's a lot of marriage happening this year, Jay.
True, Scott, and all have been happy so far. I'm also starting to get more involved with EQR's sustainability efforts outside of just the development projects that I'm working on. That includes energy retrofits for some of our existing buildings and a portfolio-wide resilience analysis to ensure that we're prepared for whatever conditions our properties might face, whether they're in, heat stress, drought-prone areas in California, or to, heat stress and maybe sea level rise issues in Boston. Very, very interesting stuff.
So publicly traded, like people can buy shares of EQR?
Exactly. So folks that want typically exposure into real estate in a diversified way can do those in REITs. And yes, folks can come on and buy right in.
And what does it mean that you're a trust?
Great question, Scott. A lot of it has to do with just kind of tax structures of the organization, but basically we are tasked with owning and managing apartment buildings in a sound manner and then paying out dividends to shareholders. So for example, folks buy shares of EQR and then receive ongoing dividends after that. That's one of the defining characteristics of a REIT.
Nice.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a professional update. We'll touch on just some personal stuff this year, Scott. Again, the real stuff, the paparazzi's after. Definers that have been listening along this year probably know that on June 3rd, Anna and I celebrated our wedding with the help of the greatest officiant in the game, mark my words, the one, the only, the Scott Breen. So Scott, I do want to pause and thank you sincerely on behalf of both myself and Anna for investing time and energy to our special day and for making it honestly unforgettable. So thank you very much.
It was super fun, and what a great opportunity for me, a first timer.
And certainly not the last. I swear, I got comments after being like, was that Scott's first gig, or like, has he done this before? And I was like, this is his first one, but it's not going to be his last. And I will say the fun spin on the marriage, and Scott, this was a surprise for you, I think. Anna and I had actually secretly eloped May 26th before the June 3rd. We did that because the 26th of the month is special for us. It's coincidental. It's both of our birthdays. It's the date of our first date. It's our dog's birthday. So we wanted to commemorate that. And that was a real fun thing for us to do on the personal side.
I didn't know about it, but what was nice learning that fact is that even if I had messed things up somehow, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, a great test run without you knowing it being a test run. But again, flawless. And then lastly, on the personal front, folks, after the wedding, Anna and I did do a honeymoon. So a few months after the fact, we took a trip to Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South Africa. We flirted with death at the edge of Victoria Falls. We dove with sharks. We completed our first, but certainly not our last safari. It was truly an unforgettable trip. And I will actually be talking about some of the observations from that trip in this episode in just a little bit. So stay tuned.
So in the Victoria Falls, do you actually feel like scared?
Scott, it was actually a funny story. So Anna and I were on the Zimbabwe side of Victoria Falls, looking across the falls on the Zambian side, and saw folks going to the edge of the water, like right at the cliffs and getting in and like smiling and waving. And it looked terrifying from that angle. And so we saw that and we're like, we have to do it. But it's funny you ask, because when you're on the Zambian side actually approaching the edge, it's not all that scary. I think it looks scarier from farther away, which is probably a good thing, because I might have lost it if that weren't the case.
No, it's always good to have those things that look more difficult or dangerous than they are, so you look like a badass. That was me at Camp Timberlane when I did the slalom shoe ski as part of the Timberbats water ski show for the girls' camps.
Oh, yeah.
It's really not that hard to do slalom shoe, but it looks difficult because it's such a small ski and you only got one.
And so, Scott, this is at camp and you're doing this for a girls' cabin?
Yeah.
You got to tell us how it went.
It was just the pinnacle of my coolness, really.
Man, if that's on video somewhere, I would love to see it.
Yeah, all right. Well, I don't do slalom shoe skiing anymore, Jay. So I do have a cool job, though. So how do you like that for transitions?
Well played, sir.
Huh? All right. So listeners, I want to tell you a bit about my job. That friendly reminder that I'm the Vice President of Sustainability at the Can Manufacturers Institute, a trade association. We represent U.S. metal can manufacturers and their suppliers. So my job is to promote and advance metal can recycling and sustainability. Aluminum beverage cans, steel cans, aerosol cans. So it's nice to represent a packaging that is the most recycled food and beverage container in the United States, as well as made of a material that can recycle forever. And you can consider that 75% of all aluminum, 75% of all steel ever produced is still in circulation because of that ability to recycle forever. And so I want to implore upon you, recycle your cans, please. They're worth a lot of money to the recyclers. We'll recycle them into new cans or other recyclable products, and you'll keep that chain going of recycling for that material.
Love it.
So last year on the Hodge-Podge episode, I mentioned that CMI had just published U.S. aluminum beverage can recycling rate targets, including going from 45% in 2020 to 70% in 2030. Well, earlier this year, we published an aluminum beverage can recycling primer and roadmap, because targets are one thing, but then you got to explain how you're going to get there. So that's what this document did. I wrote it. The design, I think, turned out really well. If you want to learn more about these targets, check out this primer and roadmap. I encourage you, go to cancentral.com/targets. Also, last year, I mentioned that I wrote some articles about the beverage container deposit return systems. Well, I want to give an update on that. So we actually launched a new microsite on what we're calling recycling refunds, rather than beverage container deposit return systems or bottle bills, because we did a consumer survey that found recycling refunds resonates a lot more with people. People like recycling. People like refunds. Makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. And to remind people, this is where you pay 5 or 10 cents when you buy the beverage container at the retailer, and then you get that money back when you return it. Much higher recycling rates with those systems. So we made this microsite, recyclingrefundswork.org. The heart of the microsite is a list of best practice principles for recycling refund programs that are endorsed by a dozen organizations and counting. So these are high-level principles written very carefully so that a big tent could get behind it. So you'll see the organizations that have currently endorsed across the political spectrum. And they include consumer groups, recycling groups, nonprofits, industry groups, and advocacy groups. So I was proud of the role I played to help put that together along with others on the team.
Awesome.
So CMI, we don't just represent aluminum beverage cans. It's all metal cans. So I want to mention on the food can front, I encourage definers to check out cannedgood.org, where you can hear from our spokescan about how steel in cans is infinitely recyclable and how steel cans help reduce food waste. Spokescan, Jay. You can appreciate that. That's good.
I love it.
And also earlier this year, I worked with Nicholas Georges and Molly Blessing at the Household and Commercial Products Association to launch the Aerosol Recycling Initiative. That has financial support from companies across the value chain, and it has two 2030 goals. One is to achieve at least an 85% recycling access rate for all aerosol cans. That means that 85% of U.S. households would have access to a recycling program that accepts aerosol cans. The other is to label at least 90% of all aerosols as recyclable, with messaging on how to properly recycle them. That properly recycle, that is key with aerosols. Please, definers, empty your aerosols before putting them in the recycling.
Make sure you use the last bit of Pam before you toss it aside.
And just take the whipped cream and just put it right into your mouth.
There you go.
That's what I would do, yeah. The last thing I'll mention on the CMI front is that I had the privilege of organizing the Global Aluminum Can Sustainability Summit in Rome, Italy last September. It was the first time we did this sort of event. There were more than 100 leaders from across the aluminum beverage can value chain in attendance. The focus areas of the summit were discussing how to operationalize the decarbonization of aluminum produced for can sheet, so basically decarbonizing aluminum production. And the second was generate transparent information on recycling and circularity, including how to measure recycled content. So coming out of the summit, CMI and other companies and organizations, we've endorsed the Mission Possible Partnerships Decarbonization Roadmap for how the aluminum industry can operate in alignment with a 1.5 degree scenario. It's not going to be easy. You'll see in that report, there's some steep declines needed in the carbon footprint of aluminum production. But it's good to see what we need to do to get there, and everyone agrees it's important to go for it.
So you've covered crazy ground this year, Scott. I'm wondering what you've got going on for the start of 2023.
So for the start of 2023, we're looking at doing more engagement at big events. So some of these events where they're or venues where they're using mainly or only aluminum beverage cans, we want to go there. And we don't just want to put recycling bins down and hope people use them. We want to use engaging tactics where people are recycling because it's fun. You could think of something like a voting bin, where maybe it's at a concert venue and you vote with your can what song you want to hear tonight.
Nice.
Or who's your favorite artist at the festival. That can sometimes be more effective than just recycle here, help the planet, you know?
I like that. Awesome.
All right, so some personal stuff. I mentioned last year that I'm an uncle. Well, already an uncle times 2. Love it, Jay.
All right.
So joining Charlotte Joe, or Charlie Joe, I love that name, is Eloise, nicknamed Lulu, another great name.
Uh-huh.
They're the cutest nieces around, so I'm excited to meet Lulu hopefully very soon. Shannon, my partner, is off at Harvard pursuing a 1-year master's in education. So I'm actually living alone for the first time ever, Jay. I've always had roommates.
And what are your quick takes?
Well, I do have the cat around, and she does demand my attention quite a bit. She's in my lap right now, but yeah, it's nice. I miss Shannon, but I've been busy, so it's okay.
Okay, that's a great answer.
And prior to our studies, we did take an epic trip to Panama. Highly recommend visiting that country, particularly the overnight sail adventure we did in the San Blas Islands.
Ooh, amazing.
A couple career, somewhat related stuff. I mentioned last year passing the level 1 exam of the Fundamentals of Sustainability Accounting Certification, or FSA. Well, I took level 2, and I passed that this year, so I'm now fully certified.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Next up, with that sort of thing, is I'm taking some courses offered by the Center for Association Leadership, which is basically an association for associations. They represent the organizations that represent others, and I'm taking these classes so I can earn a certificate of association management. So I'm excited about that.
Fantastic.
All right, so I think that wraps it up for personal updates. Our next section here, Jay, we're going to do favorite articles. We're going to switch off one at a time, so it's not as long a thing of each of us talking.
The listeners are like, thank God.
Kudos, Jay, on that idea. This is what we do. We think of what we want to do. We say, sure, let's do it. So that's the fun of having your own thing and only one other person to run it by. So, Jay, kick us off. First article.
Okay, so while Anna and I were on honeymoon in South Africa, we got accustomed to what locals call, quote, load shedding, which is effectively planned rolling blackouts across the country due to too much electric demand across an inadequate power grid. So my first favorite article from Reuters, called South Africa's Silent Revolution as Those with Cash Go Solar, covers just that. So what's interesting is that despite abundant solar and wind resources, South Africa's government has proved reluctant to adopt renewable energy. Until its relaunch in 2021, pressure from mining unions had ensured a program of private utility-scale projects was frozen for years. But the decline of debt-crippled state power utility Eskom, which produces 80% of its power from coal, has increased the urgency of finding alternatives. So, even though the country's president has promised to cut through red tape to use more renewable energy, many South Africans aren't waiting for government action, and their impatience has driven a boom in small-scale solar installations. And Scott, as Ann and I were on the ground there, we kept asking, like, this has to be a thing, this has to be a thing, and it was cool to finally see that reflected in this article. So, we're comparing South Africa as a country's slow adoption of renewables. In the first 5 months of 2022 alone, South Africa imported solar PV panels worth nearly $135 million. That amounts to over 500 megawatts of peak generating capacity. And here's the crazy follow-up to that stat. Once installed, those panels will increase the 2.1 gigawatts of estimated existing small-scale solar generating capacity by 24%, which is higher than what the government has managed to procure in the decade of its utility-scale solar strategy. So, Scott, overall, this article really hit home an experience that we had throughout our honeymoon, and something that South Africans have completely gotten used to. So, for example, Anna and I would, check into a hotel, and they would give us a sheet. They would say, hey, here's our load shedding schedule for this weekend, such that, when we would wake up, for example, on Saturday with no power, we would look at this sheet and say, oh, okay, so like this is like a scheduled blackout, like we're just not having any power at this point, and we would, understand all the reasons. So I think what was nice that I found in this article was a promising development as folks realize, hey, like I don't necessarily have to be hamstrung to this public utility that's had so many issues. If I have the capability, I can just put solar on my own roof and just forget about having these planned blackouts altogether.
So, yeah, I think the interesting part is that it's very planned, it sounds like.
It's
like
very systematic. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe a week, at least a few days. But yeah, very, very like systematic, I would say.
Okay, and it sounds like the private sector's stepping in. That's the thing that relaunched in 2021. Is that right?
So Scott, what relaunched in 2021 was basically more of a state effort to procure renewables after laying dormant for quite a while.
You mentioned that South Africans are not waiting for government action, and there's also the small-scale solar installation. So there's government procurement, there's some small-scale installations, and that sounds like that's adding up.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so Scott, that was my first one. What you got?
Right. So first I want to talk about this interesting Washington Post article in the middle of the year about heat pumps. Maybe our listeners abroad are more familiar with these. So first let's talk about how these work and then their impact. So Here's how the most common type of heat pump works. In warm months, air source heat pumps, they suck out the hot air from a room, they blow it over a coil, and cycle it through a refrigerant so cold air comes back inside. In cold months, the pump captures heat energy from air outside and cycles it through the machine to warm it and blow it inside. These pumps are similar in size to central air conditioning units. Heat pumps can heat homes up to 50% more efficiently than furnaces and water boilers. Here's one estimate of the impact of that. If all U.S. houses installing central air conditioners over the remaining decade instead bought a subsidized heat pump, consumers would save approximately $27 billion on heating and cooling bills, while decreasing greenhouse gas emissions by 49 million tons of carbon dioxide by 2032. And we've seen this sort of story play out elsewhere. In Japan, 90% of households use heat pumps to heat and cool homes, contributing to a 40% drop in the country's electricity consumption over the last decade. Now, addressing emissions from HVAC, what is HVAC, Jay? Heating, ventilation
and air conditioning. There you go.
All right, is key to the fight against climate change. Countries are providing some tax benefits to encourage purchase of heat pumps. In Italy, the government is essentially paying people to get them since it gives a tax credit equivalent to 110% of its cost. Hopefully this helps their spread. And if there are listeners out there buying HVAC systems, look into the heat pumps. Look for a tax credit. We found one that actually looks pretty nifty from a company called Gradient for $1,999. I like how they're like just say 2,000, guys. Right. So I think the heat pump consumers are sophisticated enough; they don't need that.
Excellent. Well, Scott, it's very topical because I mentioned some of the energy retrofits I might be getting my hands on. For example, like we have some buildings in Denver, and so we have to stay up to speed with Denver as it's updating its energy performance standards over time. And as it does so, it sends property owners ways that they can, help them achieve these goals. And heat pumps is a huge one. So, it's something that we're looking at from a, larger building standpoint as well, because they are that efficient, as you're saying.
Oh, that's cool that in the buildings you're involved in, they're talking about it.
Bingo.
All right, Jay, your next article.
Okay, we're going to move from HVAC systems to human composting. Colorado legislature passed a law last year that made natural organic human reduction, or composting, a legal after-death care option. The article that I'm citing here comes from the Denver Post, is called Human Composting Facilities, the first since Colorado law change, offer a unique burial option. So, now, in Colorado, human remains can be turned into soil and used for planting. And the article makes clear, I love this, as long as it won't be used for food or human consumption. Or, Scott, they can be donated to conservation efforts. The company that began this method of after-death disposal, of after-death disposition in Washington, called Recompose, is now bringing its operations to Denver and really growing the movement to make this a more common option for Coloradans after they die. So this particular company, Recompose, their system speeds up the after-death process using plant materials, microbes, and heat to turn a person into about a truck bed worth of soil in about a month. The material is then screened to remove non-organic materials and leftover bone fragments, which is a really nice visual. And then it gets cured for 2 to 4 weeks or until the soil dries. So, Scott, I think this article overall, I saw this, and shout out to Anna for actually sending it to me. It's a really cool compliment to our green burials episode that we did a few years back. And I think just something that's very interesting. That episode is actually one of my favorites just because it's something that I just never even thought of, and it has a sizable impact on the environment.
One question on this. Are you and Anna thinking about using this option?
Great question, and we haven't actually had a chance to think about it. But I will say, I mean, this does seem like a cool way to do it because, it's something that as you think of what your legacy is and what you might be able to do with yourself as opposed to being, buried with all that material with those just crazy, crazy stats, Scott, that, of all the wood and formaldehyde and metal that just gets buried every year underground.
Right.
What you could do and maybe have the idea of continuing yourself as a garden for your kids and grandkids kind of thing. I think it's a very cool option that's now legal here.
I agree. So my next article, Jay, I talked about heat pumps. Now I want to talk about septic tanks.
Oh, baby.
You didn't think I was going to go there, did you?
Let's go.
All right, so another Washington Post article. According to the U.S. EPA, 20% of U.S. households rely on septic tanks to treat raw domestic wastewater. Many of these homes, they're on the coast, and they were built with a certain level of groundwater assumed. That level of groundwater, it's changing in many places due to sea level rise. As the groundwater rises, there may not be enough separation between the septic tank and the groundwater for the soil to filter pollutants. The result can be bacteria and parasites from human waste flowing into drinking water supplies or recreational waters, creating a public health problem. So first, let's talk about Miami-Dade County. They found that more than half of the 120,000 septic tanks in that county, they're failed to work properly at some point during the year.
Oh boy.
This helps to fuel deadly algae bloom. Algae or algae?
I think either.
Algae sounds more funny, I guess. Algae blooms in Biscayne Bay, home to the nation's only underwater national park. The cost to convert the Miami-Dade County septic tank households into ones serviced by a central sewer plant would be more than $4 billion, or about $5,000 to $20,000 per home. This is out of reach, of course, for many low and middle income households. But beyond conversion to a central sewer plant where it makes sense, another important step would be updating regulations around septic tanks so that when they're built and installed, they account for the likely changing conditions due to climate change. Maybe unsurprisingly, a lot of these regulations haven't been changed in decades. For more on sea level rise generally, check out episode 63.
Wow. Very interesting, Scott. I can't wait to see where you go after HVAC systems and septic tanks.
It's just another climate change impact, that I hadn't thought of before reading that article.
Totally.
Septic
Absolutely.
tanks.
Okay. My last article for the folks, Scott, is called Some Landlords Hitting Pause on Sustainability Projects as Costs Skyrocket. This one came from BizNow. So, per the article, an increasingly tough financial environment is starting to crush property owners' willingness to spend on environmental compliance and green improvements. And I would say this is like a favorite article per se, but it's, I think, a really important one to watch, Scott, as you and I'm pretty sure, are entering the first real recession of our careers, right? And so we place so much emphasis on sustainability, and it gets a little bit tough to see instances where perhaps it gets pushed back to the back burner. So since the onset of the pandemic, the article states that project costs have increased as supply chain hurdles, material shortages, and inflation put project feasibilities under pressure. Those dynamics create really a headache for commercial real estate investors, developers, and owners. And they've been even disastrous for smaller investors and landlords. So we've got a tough financial picture. We've also got rising interest rates and real estate industry generally bracing for recession. And so, as I alluded to, Scott, some folks are reconsidering whether or not these investments in sustainability are worth making. So I found this interesting. The article cites a French company that has 200 manufacturing plants in the U.S. and is trying to meet its environmental target of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. The company maintained that sustainability-related improvements needed to pay for themselves within 3 years. And I think I saw that and thought, okay, well, that's really not a long time frame. When you think sustainability, you're thinking big picture and hopefully wouldn't be too susceptible to that short-termism thinking, Scott, that I think we've talked about several times on the show. But the article said that, quote, even in the countries that are supposed to be more advanced, hinting at this French company, it still boils down to the money. So first point being, sustainability projects are viewed pretty specifically when it comes to financial returns. That's for big companies. And then for smaller building owners on the other side, without as much capital to invest in these types of improvements, they're already struggling. So their difficulty is keeping up with material shortages, supply chain stuff, and inflation are only going to get harder as borrowing gets more expensive with all these successive federal interest rate raises. So all of a sudden, these projects, for example, of that scale, on a larger building are perhaps harder to do for some folks. So overall, Scott, I think it can be discouraging to see sustainability projects dropped quickly when these types of sometimes like external situations change. Not saying there's not reasons for doing so, but I think this all comes back, and obviously this article is pretty real estate specific, but it ties back to what drew me to EQR, where we see these investments and we think, all right, we are, very willing to do this because we understand, all the benefits of it. And other folks aren't perhaps in that situation. And I think it gets frustrating for us as folks that want to see sustainability happening everywhere all the time, to see that that's perhaps not the case in some situations.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get it if you're maybe a smaller investor, you only have so much capital to play with. But I have to think that some of these bigger companies, they can look past the short-termism, like you're saying, but also they have to know that a lot of the people that want to buy their buildings, they're like expecting this. And that also there's maybe a price premium to be had from putting in the sustainability stuff. So you would hope the premium would pay for the extra cost, but maybe it's just gotten so much, it's not worth it. And they don't, for some of the smaller ones, they just don't have the capital put towards it.
Truly. I think that short-termism is such a prevalent theme here that we're going to continue to see as perhaps the recession gets closer. But yes, I agree completely. All right, so Scott, what's your next favorite article for us?
All right, so I've got two more, and then we'll move on from this section. So the Washington Post has killed it this year, Jay. This is, I think, the third one in a row from the Post. And I think I just saw a note from them, because I'm a subscriber, the other day, that they're investing a whole bunch more in their climate journalism and wanting to do more graphics and putting more journalists around the world on this. I think it was more than 30 or something, full-time journalists on climate for the Post. So love it. So here's another one from them. They talked about this new technology making it possible to recycle highly acidic and mineral-rich liquid coal waste, known as acid mine drainage, or AMD. So it's important to address this waste because it threatens drinking water, corrodes infrastructure, and damages aquatic life. West Virginia alone has 184 sites with AMD, with operating costs of $4 million a year. An Ohio River Valley Institute report found only a quarter of abandoned mines in the United States prior to federal regulations in 1977 taking effect had been reclaimed, and it would take $20 billion to clean up the remaining sites. Recycling AMD is not commercially viable yet, but may be worthwhile from a public policy perspective. The infrastructure bill that passed includes $11 billion in funding to clean up abandoned mines and affected waterways. So why might this be useful to do, beyond just helping the environment, is that the rare earths in the AMD are needed to power clean energy products like wind turbines, and this could provide a domestic supply of rare earths, which is important considering 78% of U.S. supplies currently come from China.
I was actually, Scott, just listening to a podcast this morning that was talking about how critical it is that we onshore some of our renewable power, resource capabilities. And apparently there's one of the richest areas in California that has the types of materials needed. I'm not sure if you saw that either, but very topical.
No, I didn't. And there are deposits of some of this stuff here. I mean, we probably can't get it all here, but I mean, this just seems like a twofer, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, addressing this toxic waste and getting the valuable stuff out and then figuring out what to do with the rest. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, the other piece is from the Associated Press, and they did one this year on dam safety. So there's about 92,000 dams in the United States, most of which are privately owned, I didn't know that, and regulated by the states. So this AP analysis found 2,200 high-hazard U.S. dams. And what they mean by high hazard is those are the dams where lives could be lost if they fail. And they're in poor or unsatisfactory condition. So that 2,200 number, that's up substantially from a similar analysis conducted just 3 years ago. And the number may be even higher because of poor data tracking and releases at the state and federal level. The poor conditions make sense. Since the nation's dams on average are over half a century old, there's decades of deferred maintenance, and homes, businesses, and or highways have sprung up beneath them since they were built. The heavier rainfall due to climate change could overwhelm these aging dams. The good news is that states are starting to put more money into dam safety, particularly those that had incidents recently, like Michigan, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And the infrastructure bill includes $3 billion for dam-related projects, including hundreds of millions for state dam safety programs and repairs. But that $3 billion, That's a fraction of the $76 billion with a B that's needed. In other dam news, Jay, the Washington Post did an article on converting non-power dams to ones that make hydroelectric power. This could happen without any change in the dam's operations and a much lower footprint than building a new dam. So I mentioned that there's 92,000 U.S. dams. About 2,200 generate hydroelectric power, which is less than I would have thought.
Oh, same. I was just thinking that.
Yeah, and these hydropower resources account for 7% of U.S. energy production, so we could look to raise that number. But there's some that say, nah, none of this conversion stuff. We got to just remove the dams because they can block fish passage and bodies of water. They naturally emit methane, a potent greenhouse gas, due to the decomposition of organic matter. So, dams.
Dams. Okay, let's move on to our annual sustainability holiday gift suggestions. We're hitting your earbuds, earphones, whatever it is you listen on in early December. You've still got time to make your last minute gift ideas. And here we go. Number one, we're going to start with the solar powered rechargeable lantern. So the Solar Puff, all one word, solar powered lantern is a handy accessory for any outdoor activity. It's conveniently foldable and light, making it ideal for a backyard gathering or a camp out in the woods. It is water resistant, emits 8 to 12 hours of light, and charges within 8 hours. It's made of recyclable, biodegradable fabric and needs no batteries or external power sources. It's made of heavy-duty recyclable PET and utilizes minimal waste packaging for lower environmental impact. Best of all, they donate 10% of profits to charitable causes. Find that for $38 on Amazon.
I heard Solar Puff, and I was like, what's that cartoon show with Puff? And then I Googled it. The Powerpuff Girls.
I absolutely remember that show.
Yeah. But, Jay, I know you found this one, but I remember looking at it briefly, and there's like a handle to it. It looks kind of cool.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, it's kind of a cool design.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
All right, so Manduka Eco Series Yoga Mat is our next one. The Eco Mat, lowercase e, capital K, capital O. It has a naturally harvested rubber grip to prevent any slips, and mats can be recycled through Manduka's partnership with the Renewal Workshop, which longtime listeners might remember episode 18 on sustainable apparel with Jeff Denby, founder of Renewal Workshop.
Mm-hmm. That was an old one.
Oldie but a goodie.
Oh, yeah.
Manduka's approach to design is rooted in the principles of conservancy, creating responsibly sourced products while minimizing environmental waste. Their products are made using sustainable business practices and environmentally responsible materials, including recycled polyester and organic carbon. People that want to get their namaste on, $95 at manduka.com. And Jay, did we mention we're not being paid for these ones?
That's right. No, very important clarification. Yes, we are not being paid for these, so these are authentic, folks.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have plantable colored pencils. So you can write, draw, doodle, and design until the brand called Sprout pencils become too short to use. Then you simply turn them upside down, plant the stub, and then enjoy watching them grow into fragrant herbs, beautiful flowers, or even fresh veggies. Which is, I think I've never heard of this. It's really interesting. So all of Sprout pencils are non-toxic, biodegradable, made from sustainably sourced materials, and use sustainable production techniques. They're all made of PEFC, which stands for Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, or FSC, which is Forest Stewardship Council certified wood. They also ensure that every time a tree is harvested, another is planted. Find those for $14 on Amazon.
Jay, what % of people do you think that buy this pencil actually plant it?
I don't know, but I'm suddenly thinking about all those kids in school that would just like chew on the erasers of their pencils, you know? And man, that's a lot of wasted pencil to just go to kids' tummies and not in the ground to plant something.
Is there an eraser on this? So plant the stub.
I actually don't think so. No, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but maybe that's going to be in the Sprout 2.0.
Then you just need to, be very purposeful about what you draw.
Scott, did you ever ask to borrow someone's pencil and like you could literally see even in the wood like tooth marks in it? Like they were like just like gone and just chewed on. Like what was that phase? But I also remember in second grade like that big pink eraser was like
on the list.
Yeah.
And it's like, how did you probably use that only like a couple times, you know?
Okay, all right, Scott, last trivia question or history question. Do you remember those like plastic boxes, like, I don't know if they're called space makers or something, that everyone would like put all their pencils and stray erasers in?
Yeah.
And the logo on the top of it was indented.
Yeah,
and
it was like ribbed. Yeah.
Yeah, ribbed. And so kids would like open a bottle of Elmer's glue and like put markers, like scrub it up with markers and then pour glue on it and then have the glue dry on the top of the box. And then they would peel it off and have this like rubbery, like Space Savers, like bookmark kind of thing that they would like just toss around.
I don't know where you grew up, Jay.
It was actually pretty cool.
I mean, it sounds cool, but I think we were too busy playing with Pogs or whatever. So, all right, moving on to the next one. This one's cool. So they're all cool, but I thought this one was particularly cool. Furoshiki, a wrapping paper substitute. You think I'm saying that right, Jay? Furoshiki?
Yeah.
Okay. A furoshiki is a traditional Japanese wrapping cloth made of fabric containing cotton and recycled polyester. The furoshiki can be used in several ways to wrap different products. Unlike wrapping paper, it is flexible. It will adapt to any shape, leaving you with a beautiful and zero waste result. Gone are the days of single-use wrapping paper with the furoshiki. It's reusable and machine washable. So what you'll do is you can explain to who you give the gift to, like, hey, you can now use that to wrap a gift of your own. It's like part of the gift. Or you can say, actually, I'd like that back. I'm going to reuse it. So it's $10 on Etsy.
Yeah, I love, Scott. It's such a simple solution, but it's one that everyone thinks about, I know, during the holidays. It's like, I hate to just put on this paper that's laced with plastic, just have it ripped off and thrown away. And I think this is a really cool way to bridge that.
Well, Jay, this is why I am known for wrapping my gifts in newspaper.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so next up, Scott, we've got Sunski glasses. So that's Sunski, all one word. So Sunski sunglasses are made with their process called Superlight, which is a recycled polymer that transforms post-industrial scrap plastic into a material they use in all of their sunglass frames. On top of that, they also make accessories. So all the textiles that Sunski uses in their accessories and carry products are made of recycled polyester. Their team specifically adds color early into the production process as a way to reduce water use. On top of all of that, their packaging is completely plastic-free. They use innovative origami folds made from recycled cardboard to protect their frames during shipment, in lieu of the typical plastic poly bag used to protect eyewear.
I love that. Origami with the sunglasses brand.
Absolutely. They're also a member of 1% for the Planet, which donates 1% of sales, not profit, but sales, to environmental charities each year. Sunski sunglasses are also a climate neutral certified brand, which means that they measure, reduce, and compensate for their emissions. Check out their stuff, a lot on it, a range of prices at sunski.com.
All right, so here's a basic one. Can be a nice stocking stuffer.
Yeah.
Or, night 7 of Hanukkah when it's a smaller gift. Carbon capture soap. And this comes from Clean O2, a company out of Canada. And they say on their website, this is the world's first carbon capture soap. So behind each body bar is a new type of technology. It's called Carbon X, Carbinx, that captures the greenhouse gas, CO2. And then this Carbon X technology, they convert the carbon from the CO2 that they're capturing out of the air into pearl ash, which gives the soap a smooth lather. No part of the soap will ever turn back into CO2, and it just starts at $7 at cleano2.ca. Go Canada.
Go Canada. Okay, next up we've got a cookbook titled, it goes 1: Pot Pan Planet. So it's 1 Pot Pan Planet. It is subtitled A Greener Way to Cook for You and Your Family, where author Anna Jones makes cooking mouthwatering meals simple and green. So it has over 200 recipes for every occasion, from busy weeknight meals to weekend feasts to desserts that promise to delight. These inventive, deeply satisfying dishes will become your new go-to kitchen staples. So whether you're preparing the recipes vegetarian or vegan, you will also find information to help you reduce waste, use leftovers, make kitchens plastic-free, and become a more environmentally mindful shopper. You can check that out for $35 at penguinrandomhouse.com.
Is cooking one of your love languages, Jay? I heard that from a friend recently that that's one of their love languages.
Oh, I can't say it's one of mine. Sometimes I can get really into a dish, Scott, but usually I'm just cooking to eat it. How about you?
Well, not really. but
thank you for asking.
But for those definers where you know someone where that is their love language, I mean, this would be a good gift.
Bingo.
All right. The last one here is if you're looking for a charitable gift. And we found an organization called Uproot Project. So Uproot Project, it's a newly launched network for journalists of color who cover environmental issues, as well as students and others aspiring to cover this beat. The Uproot Project will connect its member journalists with publications, offer training, and build community as they navigate the work ahead, reporting on the environmental crises of our time. All right, so for definers that have stuck with us, Jay, this is a special offer for you.
Yeah.
If you donate to Uproot Project, send us your donation via hosts, HOSTS, at sustainabilitydefined.com, and we will match up to the first $250 donated.
Awesome.
So do it. Go Uproot Project, Google it, donate buttons there, and then email us the receipt, HOSTS, at sustainabilitydefined.com.
Fantastic. Okay, folks, we have arrived to our holiday Instagram giveaway. Congrats, we're here. We've made it. So, a little bit of background behind this giveaway and how and why we do it. So, we get a fair number of emails from companies throughout the year saying, hey, we have this cool product. Can you feature them on your podcast? We, of course, only do episodes once a month. So normally we have to say thank you, but no thank you. We've got, other topics in the queue. But eventually we said, well, hold on. Maybe these companies would perhaps be willing to make some of their product available to our loyal definers for them to win. And lo and behold, some companies have agreed. So we're going to tell you about the couple products involved in the giveaway and then afterwards tell you how you can win one. All right, Scott, so what are we working with?
Well, Jay, first I'll say that we did this last year too, right? And I feel like we only gave that reply in the last month. And I think next year we'll be more on top of it throughout the year. Be like, oh, it's May, but in 6 months from now, we're going to do a giveaway. You should do it. So yes, I hope to have a bunch next year. But we got some good ones this year. So the first one is Butia bags. Butia bags. These are garbage bags that are oxo-biodegradable, leak-proof, tear-resistant, and ultra-strong. The bags have a beautiful leafy bush-like print, which looks nice when placed outside. We also have a compostable tank top from Kent. So Kent's designers, researchers, and sustainability experts, they've spent hours studying the benefits of natural organic materials and creating products based on real people's needs. The result? A line of plantable basics and packaging made exclusively from 100% organic, plant-based fibers and materials that not only come from nature, but can return to nature as a resource because it's compostable.
Love it.
All right, so that's two. We've got the compostable tank top from Kent, the Butia bags, and then lastly, Jay, we have our own little giveaway here. We want to give some of our podcast stickers. So 3 lucky winners will get a pack of 5, put them on your computer, your luggage, your forehead, give them to your friends, whatever you want to do.
Excellent. Okay, so a solid lineup of gifts there. Here's how you can win one of them. So we try to keep this super easy. So when this episode is published on December 2nd, 2022, and through midnight Pacific time on December 31st, anyone can enter the giveaway by doing 3 things. Number 1, making sure you follow us on Instagram. Our handle is @sustainabilitydefined. Number 2, by liking our Holiday Hodge-Podge post on Instagram that will be posted on December 2nd. And then finally, you got to tag 3 friends who you think would like the podcast in the comment section of that post. So it's all taking place on Instagram. Then in January, we will be picking randomly from those that followed those 3 steps to win the products. There will be multiple winners since we'll be telling each company the one person that won their product, and then we'll DM that person for shipping details. Again, reminder, all on Instagram, super easy. Just engage with our post by December 31st of this year, and you are in it, baby.
Yeah, so you got to engage with that post from December 2nd specifically, right, Jay?
Bingo.
All right, so the last section here, Jay, We just had Thanksgiving. Let's be thankful. Let's give some thanks. Go ahead.
Excellent. So, yes, in this year in review, Scott, we do have some folks we would like to thank. First off, Square Peg, Round Hole, and Potions. You hear their music every time you play our episodes. Very appreciative of our ability to use it. We also want to thank our sponsors from 2022 that help keep our podcast moving, Scott. The sponsors this year were Climate First Bank, Acuity Brands, Glad, Tide, and Repurpose. So again, thank you to our sponsors.
And that's, Jay, how we can do things like let's just match donations to this great organization and let's hire some people. So we want to thank some people. My mom, Adrienne Breen, she helped with some gifts for this episode. She helps with various research. She gives me lots of love. So we thank her. And then Amelia Kovac, who's been our researcher for many months, and she provided her research expertise for a variety of episodes. And if you liked the graphics on social media, she was behind them. So thank you, Amelia, and we're excited to keep in touch with her. And Jay, our last couple, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, so we want to extend a big thank you again to Keaton Butler, who we lean on year-round for incredibly timely and efficient turnarounds of our audio. So Keaton, huge thanks to you. You make this job so much easier for us.
And anyone who needs editing or whatever, you got to use Keaton.
Oh, yeah. And she actually, and some folks might know this, has some killer side band projects and an amazing voice. So she's got a lot to offer. So Keaton, thanks again.
And if you want to know more about Keaton, KeatonButler.com. Easy. Done.
Oh, phenomenal. And lastly, we can't be here without you, the Definers. So thank you for sticking with us through another year. That was year, 6 of the podcast, Scott, that we've been going. And some folks have been on the journey the entire way. To those that have been, to those that are more recently with us, thank you and hope you stick with us.
It really means a lot to us that you give us your time, and we hope you find it valuable. We're excited to produce some more content for you all next year. I think that about does it, Jay. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
I'm Jay Siegel. We'll see you next year.